summer program. Today we have a very topical subject. We're talking about our border with Mexico and our other immigration policies, and we have some wonderful guests. My name's John Hare. I'm the president of the Battle of Homestead, and just in order to memorialize the 1892 strike and battle right on these very shores of the Monongahela River. We believe that by looking to our past and interpreting it, we have a better way of understanding where we're headed. So we want to look where we've been to see where we're going. And the whole premise of our programs is let's try to learn from the perspective of the people that did the work, both in our local industries here, the people that did the work in the home, the people that did the work in the schools, and let's talk about what life was like then and what life is like now. And from that, we're working towards our goal of establishing here, next to the pump house, our dream is to have a new center for labor history and future of work. That's the idea, is to look back and to look forward. So we'd be happy to share those dreams with you if you're interested in participating in our organization. And if you haven't signed up, all you have to do is give us your name and email so we can translate it right. A lot of times we can never figure out what the email is because there's one letter that's wrong or something. So give us your name and email, and you'll be getting information from us. And if you're really excited, every Wednesday morning we have breakfast together at the waterfront down here in Homestead. Everyone's welcome, and while it's not a business meeting, it's mostly informal. It really is.
Where on the waterfront?
It really is right down here, right down here.
Eden Park.
Oh, I didn't say the Eden Park. Thank you. Eden Park and waterfront in the back room. So now I want to introduce Millie Bike. Millie and Pauline, Sharon, Edie, and Delsa White formed the committee for the two events that we're having this week, looking at the separation of children at the borders and U.S. policy for immigration. Millie, let me just say a little bit about you. Millie's a native of Johnstown. Windber, PA, not Johnstown, Windber, right outside Johnstown.
Mine 40.
And her father was a coal miner, and Millie somehow fought her way to go to the university and eventually became a doctorate in history. And in the process, she wrote a book about the miners of Windber. And she was, for a time, a teacher of history at Northern Illinois University. Also Emory for a while, right? And we've been so pleased to have Millie with us for the last 7-8 years now here in Pittsburgh, working with us in the Battle of Homestead. So this is Millie Bike, and she's going to tell us about our guests in our program. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm so glad to have you here. We had a program on Thursday night. If you got the sheet, you'll see it was a Frontline PBS show, and you can watch it somehow. I will be glad to pass my video along to others who really want to use it, especially for a group, like a church group or somewhere else. Any organization that's interested in the issue of child separation. And today, that was a focus that was on the national picture of what was happening with the laws and the policies and what was going on all over the country. And it ended, the PBS documentary ended at the end of last summer after President Trump signed that executive order that was supposed to end all child separation, to have their feet deeply entrenched in the Latino community here in Pittsburgh. It's hard, you can't get volunteer immigrants to come and speak to you if they're undocumented, because ICE follows Monica, as she has told us all of the time. And I want to tell you about each of these speakers. But I also, before I do that, I just have a sentence or a couple of sentences about what we're doing. The broad theme of the program for this year for the Battle of Homestead is building bridges. Bridges from the past from 100 years ago, 1919. And those of you who came to the program that we had on that are very well aware that immigrants were one of the targets of that time. Fear abounded in 1919 in the US, and hope abounded for others in the United States. There was the Red Scare, there was the anti-nativism that was very, very powerful that eventually led to the laws that discriminated against Southern and Eastern European immigrants, some of our own family members perhaps, and other issues of that time. And so what we hope to do today in this program is to build a bridge to the Latino community. And we want to welcome all those who are interested in immigration and in the subject of what's happening to not only the children, but the parents and other family members of the immigrants, of all those people who are seeking asylum in the United States. We want to welcome you to our group and hope you will join us and think about it and see what we can do. And we hope today that our speakers will tell us how we can help them. Now let me introduce our speakers. Guillermo Perez is going to be our first speaker. He is president of the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement.
All right.
I got it this time. He is president of the local chapter. He was founder of it. He's on the national board. And that is a body that's affiliated with the AFL-CIO that deals with the labor rights of immigrants. And so that he is also a labor educator. He will go out, help organize workers, give speeches at places like this. And he's wonderful, I know. I met him in a march, and I can't remember which march it was for last summer. But and I will speak about Monica in a minute, but he came from a family, both he and Monica are the children of immigrants. They're not immigrants themselves, but they are children of immigrants. They both have good educational backgrounds, and they have both worked very, very hard for labor and for their communities. And they've been here in Pittsburgh for 15 years or something like that, working, both of them. So we're so fortunate to have them here because they can tell us things that as outsiders to that community we don't know about. Now Monica, and I will tell you that Guillermo is the son of immigrants from Cuba that came here in 1959. He grew up in Miami. He went to a whole bunch of schools and got degrees. He got a JD, a jurist degree. He got a bachelor's degree in English literature. He got a communications degree from the University of Michigan. After that, he has worked all over the place in various places but particularly about immigration. He worked for AFSCME at one point, American Federation of State and County and Municipal Employees. He worked for SEIU, the union, and he came to Pittsburgh and is labor educator at the United Steelworkers, so we're fortunate to have him. I want to talk about Monica now, who we're very fortunate to have, and maybe some of you know her because she was named the new person of the year last year at the Thomas Merton Center, and we had a nice big event for her that about a year ago. I don't know exactly when, but about a year ago. And she is the executive director of Casa San Jose, which is a nonprofit organization that's devoted to helping immigrant, particularly Latino workers and their families. She is very much an executive director. She sponsors programs for youth, for children, for women, and does whatever she needs to do to help people. She will go to court to help somebody who has to face a court hearing about possible deportation. She tries to defend them and does all this work to do that. She deals with attorneys and others who are on that side of the issue. She's very, very busy, and we are fortunate to be able to have her today. She's the daughter of immigrants from Guatemala, and I believe the other parent was from Puerto Rico. So both
Which is in the United States.
in the United States. So you know where they come from, and they both have this experience of being the children of immigrants. Anyway, she has earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in social work, specializing in community work and social action. And so we're very fortunate to have her and Guillermo. Oh, I have trouble with that name. Guillermo knows I have to correct it all the time. But please welcome them, and we want to, if you can stay afterwards and talk about and what we can do to help. I hope they'll both address those questions too. Thank you.
This is the kind of blanket that they give children who are in cold buildings and with very, very unfriendly experiences. And instead of that, we've got blankets to give to Monica to take to some children that shows that the people in Pittsburgh want to give them warmth and concern instead of unfriendly situations. So those are for you when you leave. Thank you. Oh, and any donations that go into our donations are going to be split between the organizations that are here today. So if you say, what can I do? We will get your donations to them.
That Mike, who, as many of you know, is there anybody here who doesn't know Mike Stout? No. He's our great troubadour of labor and other songs. And Battle of Homestead is so proud of him. He's very active in our group and in labor and environmental groups and many other things, and he often performs. And we asked him, our group, our 4 people, asked him if he could write a special song honoring the immigrants who came across the border or coming across the border, who are seeking asylum and can't get it and have been separated from their parents.
Caravans of migrants in nomadic chains, like the Israelites in the desert long ago, walking 1,200 miles across rugged terrains through the heat and whole length of Mexico. From Guatemala, Honduras, from El Salvador, not much but the clothes on their backs, fleeing the dictatorships our government supports, crime and poverty and the drug gang attacks. Desperate and hungry, cast out deportees, seeking asylum from hell. Demonized immigrants and war refugees, searching for the liberty bell. Oh, is this who we are? What we've become, ripping families apart, the downtrodden shun. Well, tear down the walls, open your hearts. Solidarity is where the healing must start. They call them criminals, murderers and thugs, Middle East terrorists slipping through the cracks. They want to put hate and fear of them and us, but all the lies can't change the facts. So many children separated from their families. Thousands locked up in a cage. I want to know, where's your compassion, your humanity? Where's the justice and the righteous outrage? Oh, is this here we are, what we become, ribbon families apart, the downtrodden shunned. Well, tear down the walls, open your hearts, solidarity is where healing must start. Just think how desperate some mother has to be to send her child alone off to some foreign land, caught between the violence in the places they flee and the venom of the orange-skinned man. Lit their gold pawns in the empire's games, sacrifices in the global trade war. Seems Our Lady of Liberty's message has changed. The tired and poor ain't welcome here no more. Oh, is this who we are? What we've become, ripping families apart. The downtrodden shunned, ruled by some racist, neo-fascist con. Well, tear down his walls, open your hearts, solidarity is well-being must start. This is not who we are, what we've become, ripping families apart. The downtrodden shunned, ruled by some fascist neo-con. Well, tear down his walls, open your hearts, solidarity is well-being must start. A little empathy would be a good start.
I'm going to try to do in the 20 minutes I have is share with you some of the material that I use when I try to educate the members of the Steelworkers, our rank and file people, many of whom really don't know very much about the whole immigration issue at all. And obviously some of them have very negative impressions because of some of the media that they've been exposed to. So I thought this would be worthwhile for this group, understanding that I've probably got a whole room full of labor historians here, so you're probably going to say, well, hell, I already knew that. But my attempt here is to try to put the current wave of immigration that we're dealing with in the context of what have been previous waves of migration to the United States. And in my experience, when we talk about, especially with a lot of the white working class rank and file, I find when I'm able to remind them of where they came from in their own history, they start making these connections, and I think that's really part of what the work that you guys do here, which is really important. So we start off with this image from Ellis Island. Remember Ellis Island? Anybody nostalgic for back in the day where we used to celebrate our history of immigrants? That wasn't that long ago. It's sort of been totally erased now to a certain degree. But the reason I use this image, though, is that this was the high point of mass migration to the United States. For people who don't know, you may think, oh, well, now is like we've never had so many immigrants. Technically speaking, in terms of a percentage of the foreign-born in the United States, this was the high point. Not now. This. Close to 15% of the people in the United States were foreign-born at the height of this massive wave of immigration. So I want to sort of run through quickly sort of the history of migration to the United States. So for much of its history, the U.S. operated pretty much with de facto open borders. Many people would come and go and come and go and come and go. And citizenship was originally restricted to free white persons. So in a sense, the distinction between being native versus foreign-born was significantly less important to one's status than one's race. And the plight of indigenous Americans illustrates this perfectly. It wasn't until the passage of the Snyder Act in 1924 that Native Americans were granted full citizenship. And then, of course, it's often been said that immigrants built our country, but in fact, at no time in our history has the percentage of foreign-born been more than 15%. So that suggests really our country's been built by working people, most of them native-born, many of them immigrants, and the children of immigrants, and a significant number of them enslaved. In 1800, more than a fifth of the U.S. labor force was slave labor. And now, we're seeing a lot of scholarship around this issue about how central a role slavery played in the economic development of the United States. So we have these three major waves, and then I'll talk about the fourth, because it's really the fourth wave that we're here to talk about today. The first wave, this comes from Vernon M. Briggs Jr., who is a vehement anti-immigrant economist and labor historian who wrote a glowing book about George Meany. That tells you everything you need to know about that guy. But he's got tons of great census data in that book. So on one hand, I don't recommend the book because I hate this guy, but on the other hand, it's got a lot of good information. So this first wave, 1800 to 1860, mostly immigrants in this period come from Britain, Germany, Ireland, the French-speaking region of Eastern Canada, and they are mostly unskilled laborers. The second wave, basically from 1861 to 1890, most folks in this period come from those same source countries as previously, but with a notable increase from Scandinavia and China. And as before, most are, I put this in quotes, unskilled laborers, because we know that all labor requires skill. But in point of fact, these folks came to the United States without much in the way of education or technical training, obviously. And then this third wave, the Ellis Island generation of immigrants, they were a big break historically from what had existed in the past, right? Because now, for the first time, immigrants were coming from Eastern and Southern Europe, mostly from Italy, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Croatia, Romania, Russia, Ukraine, Slovenia, and as before, most were unskilled labor. And so these massive waves of the immigrants were an integral part of the whole development, economic development of the United States, right? There's a period of time that's often called the Canal Age. The 1820s, 1830s were called the Canal Age because it's the period when several major canals, including the Erie Canal, were completed. These massive construction projects helped unify our country, spur economic development by reducing the cost of freight shipment. They would have not been possible without labor provided by German and Irish immigrants. The work was grueling, poorly paying, and often lethal. Many of these immigrants died in the course of building these canals, either due to accidents or diseases. And this picture is from a group of workers on the Erie Canal, completed in 1825. It was considered a wonder of modern infrastructure, connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic coast, and it was largely constructed by Irish and Welsh immigrants, and it's estimated that as many as 1,000 of them died in the construction of that canal. The Transcontinental Railroad, right, completed in 1869, connected east and west coasts, spurred economic development on both coasts and the Midwest. 10 to 12,000 Chinese laborers contracted by the Union Pacific were paid substandard wages, charged rent for substandard housing, and they also died by the thousands in explosions, landslides, and snow avalanches. Here again, a major, huge piece of economic infrastructure that led to the development of the country, made possible through the sweat and death of immigrant workers. And then the country's first great manufacturing and transport hub, New York City, was built largely with immigrant labor, Germans, the Irish, and Italians. By 1900, 1/5 of the construction workers in New York City were Italian immigrants who dug canals, laid paving and gas lines, built the great bridges over the East River, and blasted the underground tunnels of the New York City subway system. So every wave of immigration that we've talked about, though, we have to understand, has been met with a nativist backlash. None of these immigrants were welcomed into the United States. They weren't treated fairly or decently. They were abused and exploited and many times terrorized. And the Irish are sort of a classic example of that. And of course, the Irish are also Catholic. And that also, there was obviously a lot of anti-Catholicism among the native born. But the irony is that our labor movement has always had this conflicted relationship with immigrants. It's very strange, right? Because what existed in the way of organized labor at the time did not welcome these immigrants. And I would add that was true, too, of the folks who fought here in Homestead. So that might be a nice topic for another workshop. But that notwithstanding, some of the most famous and important struggles in our labor history were conducted by immigrants. So in 1912, 61% of Colorado's local coal miners were immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. The United Mine Workers, one of the first early industrial unions, aggressively sought to organize these immigrants. In 1913, the UMW led 10,000 mostly immigrant mine workers in Ludlow, Colorado, in a strike for union recognition, an 8-hour day, and the right to be paid in US dollars. The strike gained national attention after state militiamen set fire to the strikers' tent encampment, killing 2 women and 11 children. And I've never had the opportunity to go to the memorial. I'm guessing some people in this room have been to the Ludlow Memorial. The Great Bread and Roses Strike of 1912, 23,000 garment workers successfully struck the American Woolen Company in Lawrence, Massachusetts, winning overtime pay, hourly rate increases, and reinstatement of strikers without discrimination. The strike was organized by the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, and involved immigrant workers, mostly women and children, from Russia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Italy, and Lithuania. I also want to mention just also another very famous strike. September 22nd, 1910, 16 women struck the major Chicago garment company Hart, Shafter, and Marks. Though wages and hours and conditions were all bad, the final straw for the women was the imposition of a bonus system which allowed supervisors to play favorites with some workers as well as cut in the piece rate of a quarter cent. By the end of that week, the original 16 were joined by 2,000 other women. When the United Garment Workers Union officially sanctioned the strike, 41,000 workers walked off the job. So, notwithstanding the position against immigrants that the labor movement took, there were parts of the labor movement, right? The industrial unionists who recognized that immigrants had to be part of their organizing. That if they were ever to build any real power on an industrial level, they would have to welcome people of color, immigrants, and women into the labor movement and into organized labor. And that changed everything for us, this model of industrial union. And none of it, of course, would have been possible without immigrants. And as a steelworker, I know this too, that if not for example, the mine workers funded the organizing of steel, but so did the immigrants who worked in the needle trades. They were a central part of industrial unionism. And this is my favorite. I love this story. 1909, 5,000 workers at the pressed steel car plant in McKees Rocks went on a 2-month strike to protest the pool system pay scheme that allowed foremen to arbitrarily set pay rates for workers. And with help from the IWW, the strikers won an end to the pool system, a 10% increase in wages, the firing of all scabs, the rehiring of all strikers. The strikers were largely immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, And this is what Debs came out and spoke at that during that strike, and I don't have to tell anybody in this room who Debs was. And this is pretty amazing. This is what Debs said about this strike. He called it the greatest labor fight in all my history in the labor movement. A harbinger of a new spirit among the unorganized, foreign-born workers in the mass production industries who see here in McKees Rocks the road they must travel, the road of industrial unionism.
They spoke 16 different languages.
And then there's also the classic irony, right? Try to think of a labor leader who isn't foreign-born. I mean, a historic labor leader. It's hard when you look at it. I mean, here's Sam Gompers, first president of the American Federation of Labor. He immigrated as a child from England and went to work making cigars to support his family at the age of 10. First president of the Steelworkers, Phil Murray, who went to work as a mine worker in Scotland, also at the age of 10, before immigrating to the United States when he was 16. Bessie Abramowitz Hillman, who immigrated to the U.S. from Russia as a teenager, speaking only Yiddish, and who went on to help organize the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America with her husband, or he would become her husband, Sidney Hillman. Mary Harris Jones, a.k.a. Mother Jones, perhaps the most famous orator, organizer, and troublemaker of the late 19th, early 20th century, who immigrated to the U.S. from Ireland as a child in the 1840s. And then, do you recognize this guy? Anybody know who that is?
Joe Hill.
It's Joe Hill. Right.
Sweden.
Very good. Joel Emanuel Haglund, a.k.a. Joe Hill, the labor activist, poet, and songwriter who wrote songs and poems for the IWW to be read and sung at demonstrations and picket lines. He was famously framed and executed for the murder of a Salt Lake City grocer. Before he died, he sent a telegram to Big Bill Haywood, another famous IWW activist, telling him, this is the quote, "Goodbye, Bill. I die like a true blue rebel. Don't waste any time mourning. Organize."
Where was he from?
He was from, somebody said it, right? Sweden. All right, I got 5 minutes to wrap it all up. So, we had this massive wave of migration at the turn of the last century, and then we went through a period where there was very little migration at all, right? Starting in the 1920s, that was the first federal law that was enacted to really restrict immigration, and it specifically targeted immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. And then we went through basically a 60-year period where immigration to the United States was very low, but that there was a huge internal migration that happened during this period, right? It's called the Great Migration. So it's not to say that we didn't have a need for, unskilled, low-wage workers. We just got them. We used internal migration to address that. So between 1915 and 1970, 6 million African Americans left the rural South for large cities across the Northeast, Midwest, and West. This results in dramatic demographic changes in the U.S. Between 1910 and 1930, cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit, and Cleveland saw their African American populations grow by 40%. And the number of African Americans employed in industrial jobs nearly doubled. I mean, the Great Migration, Pittsburgh, August Wilson, right? You can't find a better illustration of what people went through. And there's a beautiful book called The Warmth of Other Suns. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. You read that book and you can't help but think of how the Great Migration was so similar to what immigrants are struggling with to this day. So we have this amazing history. And now we have the fourth wave that I believe pretty much ended at the start of the Great Recession. A majority of the immigrants come from Latin America, with the largest number immigrating from Mexico, followed by the Philippines and China. Almost a third are undocumented, partly as a result of changes in immigration laws in the mid-1960s that for the first time placed severe restrictions on the number of visas granted to Latin American immigrants. Obviously, migration, anytime we talk about migration, we're talking about a system of pushing and pulling. There's a push in the case of this situation for many of the folks who came over in this last wave. They're fleeing poverty, they're fleeing violence, and in some cases they're fleeing political persecution. But in many ways they're very much like the previous waves of immigration, right? They're people seeking a better life for themselves and their families. They are met with this anti-immigrant backlash, as we've seen historically as well. But ultimately, I believe, and I completely believe, that they are central to the revival of the labor movement here in the United States. And that's why my organization is very dedicated to bringing them into our labor movement. My union represents undocumented workers. Every major union in the United States has members who are undocumented. And we have a legal duty, a duty of fair representation, to represent them and to advocate for them. And so they are now a central part, and maybe during the Q&A, I can talk a little bit about what is it that organized labor wants to see in the way of immigration reform. Because unfortunately, in this crisis, we're so focused on the horrors that are happening now that we're not actually talking about what would a functioning immigration system actually look like, right? So, thank you very much.
I see that great minds think alike, because the first part of my presentation is exactly what Guillermo said. So I'm going to skip it all, because I think he did a really good job explaining what I would have done. But, I mean, it's the same thing. Same thing, you know, we'll talk about these different ways of immigration. His dates were probably better than mine. But, you know, and just to realize, you know, people have been coming to this country for a very long time for the very same reasons. And, you know, when we talk about the folks that are coming now, and we start to think about how absolutely terrible your situation has to be at home in order for you to come here. And I think that song really, I heard that part there, and it really made me think. You know, so I just have some information here. You know, people are obviously migrating because of poverty and violence, right? So these are some of the daily wages in Latin America. And I've been to a few of these countries, and I can tell you that a tube of toothpaste costs there what it costs here, right? And so just because they're making less doesn't mean that the cost of living is less. And so people are literally leaving because there is no way for them to live their dream. How we talk about the American dream, some of these countries don't have the Mexican dream or the Guatemalan dream because it doesn't exist. Right? So, I mean, look at Honduras. How can you survive on that much money per day? So what does this mean for Pittsburgh? Right? So Pittsburgh, for a long time, and still, our population is steadily declining. And currently, the only population that is growing is the immigrant population. But we're not being very nice to them, are we? No, right? So if you look at a lot of city, like towns, and the main street, all of those businesses are immigrant owned, right? I live in the South Hills. I look at like Beachview, Broadway Avenue. How many businesses, I mean, 12 years ago when I first got here, there was like maybe 3 stores open on that street, right? And now you've got, today, Las Palmas is having a huge Cinco de Mayo celebration where it's just bringing people there not only to celebrate the culture, but to celebrate the fact that folks really are coming to our communities in order to make them better, right? I live in Brookline, and all of those businesses are immigrant owned. I wanted to talk a little bit about the immigration system. I am not an attorney, but I can tell you, I think I'm pretty bright though, and I can tell you this is hard, right? This is really hard. So when people say, hey, you know, I'm all about immigrants, but only the ones that do it the right way, right? Well, this is the right way. Do you see all those stops? It's a lot, right? So just, you know, a little bit of data here. 56.6 million Latinos are already here in the United States. Sorry to make it seem, we're already here, guys, right? We were born, a lot of us were born here. And we make up about 17.6% of the population. So one of the things that has been happening under this current administration is that they've really started to limit the amount of people that they are allowing into this country. And so one of the tactics that they've been using is this ban. The bans that they've had, I think they're like on 3.0 at this point. And it is, you know, a ban, and again, I know a couple things, I don't know much about this, but like, to me, most of those countries look like they have a high Muslim population. So in reality, if we think about what this isn't really just like a travel ban, it's a Muslim ban. Let's just call it what it is, right? So, and then, so that's limiting the amount of people that come in, and then taking away protections from folks that are already here, right? So with TPS, and you know, that's a temporary protected status for folks that have been coming from countries who, at some point in time, were deemed not livable, or maybe because of a hurricane or whatever happened in those countries. Folks have been here for a long time, they have children here, they have grandchildren here, and now we want to take away that status from them and send them back to the countries that we said weren't good enough for them to live in a year ago. I mean, I don't think that there's been some major developments in these other countries that, or maybe it was just a development of our new person in power, I guess. Anyway, so the other thing is scare tactics that folks, right? So we're limiting the amount of people, we're scaring the people that live here, because apparently anybody that looks like me is gonna come and sell drugs to you and do all these other horrible things, right? So they've come up with things like the public charge, which basically scares folks. If you are an immigrant, you have American-born children, and you need to get medical assistance or any assistance for your American-born child, you can get that if you qualify. But with things like the public charge rule, what ends up happening is that you're scaring people into not applying for these things, and then what we end up with is, I mean, I have kids that go to school, and I don't want them around other kids that didn't get their vaccinations and are sick, right? But when you're doing things like this, you're scaring people not to receive these services, and then that impacts all of us, right? This new thing with HUD, right? So it's like, let's just call it what it is, right? So immigrants aren't here taking housing. They're not taking affordable housing or public housing to the point where there is none. The real reason is that we have a lack of public housing. And why is it? Because of the funding that's been cut, right? So, but scaring people into thinking that this is the way immigrants are, they're here to steal and take, is a way to get people to kind of believe, you know, what's the horse thing with the little, right? Yeah, those things, right? It's just another scare tactic. Anyway, so I'm just going to talk about DACA just for a minute. DACA, just like TPS, does not provide a pathway to citizenship, right? So DACA is for folks that have been here, and actually this program is technically ended, right? So if you had DACA before September of last year, you can still renew it every 2 years. But if you didn't, and you are now eligible because now you turned 16, you cannot apply for it, okay? So what this does is that it gives you a temporary protection of deportation, which really, ever since DACA technically ended, we're seeing more and more DACA folks being deported. And it gave you a work authorization and a social security card. But here again, it doesn't provide a pathway to citizenship, right? So people are always saying like, oh, those DACA people, they're so lazy, they should be citizens. Well, you know, I have teenagers and early young adults living at home, and they're pretty lazy too, right? They were born here, right? But I do agree, but not any more lazy than any of the DACA folks that I know, right? And I do agree with those ill-educated folks that want to say things that aren't true, with the fact that I believe that these folks should be citizens, right? But there is no way for them to become citizens. So what does this cause? When we went to DC, when DACA was ended, we were standing outside of the White House when we heard the news, and I honestly was not prepared because I didn't think that it would happen. And so we had a busload of DACA folks, their parents, their friends, and a bunch of allies. And when we heard the news, it was devastating, right? Because these folks, they're not kids anymore. They're like in college. They've graduated. They own businesses. They own homes. They do all these wonderful, amazing things. And one of the girls, this was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I believe, and she was supposed to sign on her house on Friday. She was buying a new home. And she did not. She did not, because if she loses her DACA, she loses her work permit. And if she loses her work permit, she can't work. So what this does is like a destabilization of our communities as well. And it leaves them more vulnerable for deportations. Oh God, and then there's this massive whole uptick in ICE pickups and deportation. You know, under the Obama administration, it was bad. It was bad, right? It's way worse now, but it was still bad then, right? And so now, under that administration, there was a list of priorities for folks that they were actively looking for. And now that list has gone out the door, and it's anyone. It's anyone. It is parents walking their children to school. I had a father let go of the hands of his kids at an elementary school and run because ICE was chasing him. How well do you think those kids did in school that day? They're little kids. I get calls in the morning where I have to wait for ICE to leave to get the parents and kids out so that I can take the parents to work and the kids to school. And the kids are crying, please, I don't want to leave my parent. Because they know the risk of what's involved here. So they've been just horrible, even worse now. And so what does this lead to? And so this is like the little funnel. So I talked about the restricting of the numbers of people that are being allowed to come in, making it harder for people to obtain their green cards and citizenship, these scare tactics that they've been using to make people feel unwelcome, taking away protections, and then this mass deportation of people. And so I just wanted to give that little bit of history so you kind of set the stage of now what's happening when we talk about the separation of families, right? So let's be clear. The separation of families did not start at the border a year ago. It did not start there. And it did not end there, right? Because people have been being picked up, whether it's at 6 o'clock in the morning when they're dragging you out of bed in front of your children and handcuffing you to take you away. That is a separation of families. That father is no longer with his children. Or you've got now, today, a grandmother crossing with a grandchild because that's all they have. And unless you're a mom or a dad, they separate you. Those kids end up in our backyards, in Holy Family, where they're housing children. They say it's housing, it's shelter care, it's detention. Come on. Let's be real. Let's call it what it is. And these are things that we shouldn't allow to happen in our backyards. The other thing that we shouldn't allow to happen in our backyards is this Burke's Detention Center. So the Burke's Detention Center is one of 3 family detention centers in the country, and it's here in the state of Pennsylvania. I could tell you all of the atrocities that happen here. I've been there half a dozen times. It's absolutely horrible. But we have people in office that have the power to shut this place down. And people say, well, wait, if they shut it down, won't they just go somewhere else? Well, I don't want them in my state. I don't want these practices to be happening in my state. And if enough states stand up, then maybe these facilities won't exist anymore. Because when you have mothers that can't sleep in the same bed as their babies, because then the guards come and flip your bed over at night while you're using one of these, I don't want that to happen. We can't continue to allow these things to happen. And it's because we don't know, because it's not on the news, because it's not pretty to be on the news. If you really want to learn what's going on, you really need to get involved, and there are steps that you can take in order to stop these things from continuing to happen. That's time. Making phone calls, I say to folks, hey, if you're shy and don't want to call and would like to call at 5 o'clock and leave a voicemail, you can go ahead and do that. But I'm really encouraging people now to do it before 5. Like, this is serious. This didn't get here with the election of the last president. It didn't get here.
Thank you.
Right? And so it's going to take a long time to kind of fix or make it better or anything. And it's not like, oh, my neighbor's really into that. I'll just let my neighbor do all the work. No. The time to sit back now and think that somebody else is going to take this, that's long enough. It's our responsibility. So there's that. At Casa, we have a newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. And in that newsletter, there's always something that you can do. There's ways to volunteer. There's folks to call. There's marches and protests. There's all kinds of things. But showing up in whatever capacity you have, even if it is a phone call, is a way to show up. So thank you. Yeah, parts. So based on the folks that we service at Casa, the vast majority of people are families. They are families. We do help a lot of folks that have a child in detention and bring them here, whether they're at the border or wherever they've been detained. And the other thing is that when we talk about unaccompanied minors, so this is how they kind of get away with holding these kids, because they're not unaccompanied until you separate them from their family member. That's when they become unaccompanied, and that's how they can hold them in these detention facilities, because that's what they are to me, right? And then do the things that they need to do to hopefully ultimately reunite them with a family member here in the United States. She said, she asked about how active ICE is in this area, and then how Holy Family called themselves a soft detention center. Right, so
it's a government contract.
Yeah, it's a government contract, and so detaining children is just not good, ever. But so with ICE here, there are times where we get calls every single day of the week that ICE has been picking people up, every single day. And it's not one person, it's not 2 people, it's sometimes 10, 12, 15 people. I had a gentleman who was there translating for other people, and he said in just one day, and he said 28 people were picked up that day. So it's all of this area, it's like Beaver, Butler, Westmoreland, it's all of that. So.
Do they get sent to Berks? What happens to them?
So no, Berks is specifically a family detention center. So those are families that are seeking asylum, that they have the legal right to seek asylum, and they're being placed in detention. But yeah, so we don't have ICE beds in Allegheny County, and so if you're picked up by ICE, you most definitely will go to Beaver or to Cambria first. And then you end up in York, and then from York is where the proceedings begin. Yes, sir?
Actually, wait for me to bring your mic here, please.
Monica, could you briefly just talk about the program that you guys I think in April you did a program where you encouraged people to sign up to help go knocking on doors in particular neighborhoods to try to create a support zone?
Absolutely. So we had our community resistance zones, and this is a project that we had been thinking about for over a year. We just finally got to implement it. But we knocked on over 2,000 doors in 2 neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, and we talked to people about their immigrant neighbors. The other thing that we did is we gave them something they could put in their window that was like, the kind of like you're welcome here type of thing, right? And on that, on the outside, it showed people, I am someone who supports my immigrant neighbors and I can help you. And on the inside, it told you your rights if you see ICE detaining people. So your rights for yourself and the rights of the people that are being detained. It was amazing.
How did you find this?
Hold on.
Yeah, I went one day. It was quite an experience, and people that came to the door, a few were a little grumpy or misled by their sense of history. But can you give some idea like how people have responded and where you plan to go with that the community resistance zone program in the future?
Sure. So it was, I thought it was gonna be horrible, because I live in the South Hills and I know how I've been treated there, right? So I was like, listen, I don't wanna have anything to do with knocking on these doors. I'll feed people. So, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. There were a few people who were like, no, we hate everyone, blah, 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 go away. But hey, they're just grumpy people. But, so yeah, and we're going to do another one in Beachview, because we didn't hit the doors that we really wanted to there, so we're gonna go back there. So I'm assuming you do get our newsletter, and that's how you knew we were having that, but definitely look out for it.
And why East Liberty? I mean, are there more immigrants moving over this way?
Yeah, we have a satellite office there at East Liberty Presbyterian Church, so, there's a large population growing out there as well.
Could you clarify one quick fact? I'm sorry. You said 58.6 million Latinos are here now. 17.6 were born here. So the rest have come.
No, I said that all the Latinos together are comprise 17.6% of the population total.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the whole population.
Yes, ma'am.
Twofold. To address the question regarding ICE, local police departments, when they arrest someone for like a traffic violation, and Mount Lebanon Police Department is one of them, will contact ICE and let them know that they have a person in captivity. So I think as citizens, we need to let our police officers know we don't appreciate them acting as ICE agents. And communities need to stand up and confront police who are then acting on the benefit of ICE. Second of all, what alternatives do we have to like this Burke Center and that? So when we have these families coming in, how are we housing them? What are we providing? Do we have HUD facilities? I mean, what are we doing with these immigrant families?
No, so the alternative to being held in detention is that you are processed at the border. So all this money that they're spending to build these facilities, to house these people, they get so much money per day to do this, right? All of that money could go into resources for having better ways to have people at the border when people are seeking asylum to process them. So you can wait in the United States, because they are in the United States, while your asylum case is processed, right? I mean, you don't qualify for anything at all whatsoever, but you are able to be free with some decency and not housed in these detention facilities. So so there are some people that cross and then they are seeking asylum and they're processed and then they're able to just stay in the United States with family throughout their immigration process.
Monica, we have a crew of us here are from the South Hills. We live in Whitehall and Castle Shannon and Mount Lebanon. So we belong to at least two other organizations, the Isaac Walton League and also the South Hills Justice Seekers. And we've worked with you before and just want to let you know our doors are open.
Thank you. And I think I had one more over here.
Do you see people with basic needs of food and clothing, and that's the kind of thing people can help with too? Everyone says, what can I do, what can I do? Give us some ideas about what that would be.
Absolutely. What we've seen right now is a lot of single parents, single dads with young children from Guatemala. And so it's warmer now, but in the last few months they would just, they'd be released and they would have just literally the clothes on their backs, and they needed clothes and food and even temporary housing. And so like when we talk about homelessness in our community, it's usually 5 days. It's 5 days, they just got here with their child and the job that they're supposed to start isn't ready, but once it starts they have housing or whatever it is. So it's usually a very quick need and it's very, very temporary.
Do you keep things at Casa San Jose?
We do.
See, that's the kind of thing, I'm like a hands-on person.
Yeah.
We could do that kind of thing, some clothing, some blankets, whatever.
Yeah.
So that they're ready for you to pull off shelves.
Absolutely. We've even had landlords who are saying, okay, listen, I have this very small apartment that's empty. If you need it, just let me know. And it's usually like a day or two. It's nothing it's very different when it's someone who comes from a different country who just don't know the language, you don't know how to take the bus, you don't know anyone here, and but it's very amazing how quickly they learn these things and they're able to provide for themselves.
And this is just a point of information. John Kelly, who was just the chief of staff, just got hired by the contractors who build
Imagine that.
the detention house. Talk about corrupt.
This is sort of a... Hold on. Not everybody can hear.
Sort of a tangential question. Do the Latin American countries the people from these countries that are trying to get into this country, is there any kind of a wave of moving south to try to get into any of the South American countries, or does the isthmus prevent people from going overland? And do those countries welcome them, or is it impossible for them to get into these countries?
Yeah, so I think that's a heavy question. So I only know what I know, and that's it. But from what I understand is that folks that, let's say for example, if there are some people out to harm you, right? And that's why you're leaving because of that. If you're moving and, let's say you're trying to leave Guatemala, if you're in Honduras, they're gonna find you in any of those countries. That's very easy for them to find you, A. B, I also think of folks are, hey, I wanna have a better life and I'm gonna risk this, leaving everything behind to go to the next country over where it's just as bad. I might as well just make this larger trip. And I know right now with everything that's happening in Venezuela, there are countries, I think like Peru, who are doing things to try to help folks from Venezuela come there. But it's a lot of stuff that I don't know very much about, but yeah, yes.
Are refugees who are awaiting determination of their status allowed to work? That's number one. And number two, what happens with the court dates? I mean, is that like continuing process? I know someone who every 3 months or something has to go to court. Is that for waiting for eventual determination of what her status is?
Correct. So refugees, when they come, they have work authorization. It takes them just a few days, maybe like a week or two for them to get there, because I think they come with their social security number and their work author, I think. I don't work very much with refugees, but I know they are able to work almost immediately when they get here. Refugees. But that's different from the folks that I work with.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm referring to people seeking asylum.
No.
They're not allowed to work, right?
No.
Okay.
No. And they take away their passports,
That's right.
and then they're forced to go to the consulate, which is in a different state. It's just set up to make them fail, but they do have to go to court and then ultimately get their hearing to see if they have a good asylum case.
And every time they go to court, they risk being deported at that moment?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
This is a quick question. Does the Pittsburgh police report ICE from someone who's...
No, we have a very good policy with Pittsburgh Police. Yeah, but that's one of over 130 municipalities in our county. So if you're a step away in Mount Lebanon, our office is just a few blocks from Dormont, and you can make the wrong turn and end up in the wrong place, right? Okay, thank you so much. I'm very sorry, but I have to.
Though Amazon warehouse workers who went on strike recently in Minnesota, they were fighting a speed up. They're all immigrants. I think they're Somali. At any rate, the picture I wanted to show you was a picture of a gentleman named Jose. He's from Honduras. And last month, I had the thrill of driving out to Cambria and getting him out of jail. He was the first recipient of a loan from a bond fund that my organization, LACLA, created with Casa San Jose, also with another organization called the Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition, PICC. and another group here that's based in Philly that's also here called Justice at Work. Before they were Friends of Farmers. You may have heard of them before. Now they're Justice at Work. So last year, we hold an annual fundraiser every year. We have a big event for Hispanic Heritage Month. Maybe some of you have been to it. If you haven't, we'll make sure that you know about it this year. It's called Que Viva Clemente. So all you Pittsburghers have to know who Clemente is, right? Roberto Clemente, the most famous Latino associated with Pittsburgh, right? So we came up with this idea of having an event every year with terrific Puerto Rican food and great live music and a celebration of the legacy of Clemente. In large part, I'll be really honest with you, I have a much easier time getting money from unions when I say it's for Clemente, because people love Clemente in Pittsburgh. The other great thing about Clemente, though, is he was the first Latino member of the executive board of the Players Association. Clemente was, as we say, a syndicalista. He was a unionist. He believed very strongly in the players' union. Aside from that, he was the super down-to-earth, amazing man, a man of the people. There's a great story in the first World Series that he was in the early '60s. Everybody knows about that World Series, but he was fairly new to the team at that time. And after the game was over, he just spent the evening walking all over Pittsburgh. I don't know if you can imagine, like a big-time athletic superstar winning a national championship and just walking around the streets talking to people. And he made friends. He was just an extremely down-to-earth, decent human being who endured quite a lot of disrespect coming to this city, being Afro-Latino, not really fitting in with the African-American community exactly. And there was practically no Latino community to speak of. And just proving himself. And so we're just thrilled to death to remember him every year and to have this event. And since we started doing it, the first one was in 2013. We've raised, in those years, we probably raised around $70,000, all of which has gone to Casa San Jose. Now, this last year, it didn't go to Casa San Jose. I should correct myself, because this year was the first year that we said, you know what? We see the need of creating a bond fund. We had these discussions. Oftentimes, people get picked up by ICE. There are some cases in which, if they get legal representation, they have a shot at getting a hearing for a bond. And these bonds get set, as you can imagine, they can be anywhere between $5,000 to $25,000. And families really struggle to try to raise that kind of money to get somebody out on bond. So we established the bond fund from our Clemente event last year, and then Casa went out and raised some more money, and right now we've got a little over $20,000 in this bond fund. And this brother Jose from Honduras was our first applicant last month. He needed $8,000. The irony is he had $8,000. But of course he had no way of getting it because he was in detention. And so it was the easiest loan you could make, right? Because the guy's got the $8,000. And so we said, all right, Jose will be our first. He'll pay it back right away. Now we need an obligor, because Jose didn't have any family member. You need somebody who is either a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident to post the bond. And we didn't have one for Jose, so I ended up being the obligor. And I don't know if you've often walked around with $8,000 in cash. I don't, but I did that day in order to buy money orders, because that's all ICE will take, and to go to the ICE office and spend the day, because you will spend the day. It really shouldn't take more than 20 minutes, but it's ICE. So that means they'll make you wait and wait and wait and wait. And so it was 4 hours waiting around for them. But they finally posted the bond. We jumped in a car, drove out to Cambria. If you've ever been, when I say it's in the middle of nowhere, that is not an exaggeration. It is literally in the middle of nowhere. We get there, and we go into the prison, and we say we're here to pick up Jose. And the guard says, well, he's not ready yet. He's gonna be released from out back. Why is he being released out? Like, I'm in the front where people come and visit inmates. There are seats there. Why not bring him out here? This is how we do it, okay? So he sat in the car waiting for this man to appear. And finally when he appeared, he was just dazed and confused. They didn't even tell him that we were there to pick him up and get him out. He thought he was being deported. And they just opened a door and they just pushed him out. He had no coat. This was last month. He had no coat, no gloves, no hat, no wallet, no ID, nothing. All of that stuff is in York. And they just opened a door and pushed him out. And I saw him and I ran to him. I said, Jose, I told him in Spanish, we're here to take you home. Yeah.
And this is for the lucky ones that get bond.
That's right.
Where is he now?
He's here. The week we got him out was his little girl's birthday. He got to he got to be there with her. And the next day, that guy was at Casa San Jose paying the $8,000. And we've already gotten another compañero out. We've got 2 more applicants coming in. This bond fund, if you want to do something, let's contribute money to this bond fund. It's having a dramatic impact. Just so you understand, people who get out on bond have a much higher likelihood of staying in the United States. If they stay in detention, the odds take a very bad turn for them. And that's aside from the fact that Jose was not picked up because he was committing a crime. Jose was identified by his ex-partner, a U.S. citizen, who's having a child support dispute with him. And her solution was to call ICE. And that's how he got picked up. He's lived here for 15 years. So this is what's happening in our community right now. People are terrorized. My organization was doing a lot of wage theft cases, mostly in construction. We almost get no cases now because people are too frightened. When they don't get paid for work that they do, they're too frightened to report it, to do anything about it. We had our May Day march on Wednesday. We had to caution people. We had to have attorneys on hand. We had to hand out phone numbers. The idea being that just in case ICE shows up, we want to have plans put in place. Can you imagine? You see what I'm saying? You can't. It's a police state.
Did they?
No, they didn't, but they have in the past. We've had situations where they do turn up. Especially when we marched on the south side. We started at ICE and we marched on the south side, and they were absolutely all over the place. Yes.
If you're hosting a family or someone, can ICE come into your home and take them?
No, ICE can't come in. See, the thing is that ICE does not ever show up with warrants for anything. Okay? This is Monica talking about knocking on doors. The irony is that all the undocumented folks know not to answer the door. So it makes door knocking can be pretty challenging in a situation where people are told, don't open the door. Don't provide any information. Don't open the door. And so the thing is that ICE has no right to enter your home unless they have an arrest warrant, right? Which they generally don't. And so people are also told, ask to see a warrant if they're knocking on the door. What ICE typically does is they'll just, as Monica was saying, they'll park in front of a building, knowing that the people in that building now cannot leave the building. So as she said, people can't go to work, kids can't go to school. Now we have the situation with the courthouses, people can't, are afraid to go to court, whether that's for family court or small claims court or any of that. It's a horrible, horrible time to be undocumented in the United States right now. And as Monica said, it was bad under Obama, it was terrible under Obama. We labeled him deporter-in-chief. He deported a lot of people, but he did have a priority policy that was occasionally followed. We know wage theft is going on, right? The Marriott case is actually the brother who was part of that case marched with us yesterday, Antonio. So this is typically what happens, okay? Antonio lives here in Pittsburgh. He's at Las Palmas. He sees a notice up on the bulletin board that somebody's looking for painters to do work to paint hotel rooms at this Marriott near the airport. So he says, I can do that, and I can recruit a whole crew. And he recruits a crew of folks. He gets in touch with a subcontractor. He works out a deal with the subcontractor, and the subcontractor has them start painting these hotel rooms, and they paint about 25 rooms. And then the whole project gets shut down, and Antonio and these guys never get paid for the 25 rooms that they painted. And so Antonio comes to LACLA. He says, I didn't get paid. I said, all right, well, who hired you? Some dude in Atlanta who's long left town. I said, well, we got to find out who hired him. So let's go to Marriott. So we go to the hotel, we walk in, they're confused. The woman in charge is not there, so I leave my card, and then I get a call from the contractor. Not from the hotel, but from the contractor. Contractor says, this is not my problem. You gotta go after this subcontractor. And I said, that subcontractor is a thief. And you know he was a thief. And we're never gonna track him down, and I don't even know if he has the money. Are you gonna pay? Oh no, we're not gonna pay. Well, then I guess Marriott's gonna pay. Oh no, don't go back to that hotel. What? What'd you say? Bye. We went back to the hotel again, and then the third time we did a demonstration, and the next day that contractor cut a deal and paid us the money that we were claiming. I always tell folks, we had another great case it was called City Vista. That was even worse. Those guys were owed quite a lot of money. And it's the same kind of deal. Everybody's just pointing the other way. Well, this is not my problem. You have to go find this subcontractor, right? And then you'll never find them, and then the contractor won't do it, and then, so in that case, we went out, they were trying to rent these apartments, and we brought a whole crew of people out there, and they called the cops on us. They wouldn't talk to us. They called the cops, and the cops came, and they said, well, you need to go to court. I said, I don't need to go to court. It's called the court of public opinion, okay? These people are renting out apartments, and they are the beneficiaries of the labor that these men did on here. And these men never got paid. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't care where they get the money, but they're going to make sure that these guys get paid. And if they don't like it, then, we'll just keep coming back. And only next time we're going to be a big rat the next time we come back. And those people also pay, right? So what does it tell you, right? Nothing beats organized. There's nothing more powerful than organizing an action, right? Rather than, because even if we take these cases to court, right? How are we going to enforce a judgment? Because people will never see the money otherwise. And so I'm hoping we get back to the day where we're back in the business of making sure that immigrant workers are getting paid. But right now, we're just surviving day to day to try and do whatever we can to try to keep families together, to try to keep them in this community. Our city needs immigrants, desperately. Our country needs immigrants, right? This is why, for me, it's super important that people know that this is the position of the national labor movement. We are pro-immigrant. We are seeking immigration reform that will allow 11.3 million people, will give them a path to citizenship, right? I mean, the irony with this administration is they're saying that we're full up, but you know what? We're not so full up that they haven't increased the number of temporary workers coming here, right? They're all about temporary workers. So I can see the day where, they'll just continue to terrorize undocumented people and at the same time look for ways to increase the number of temporary guest workers, right? To sort of take the exploitation in Latin America and bring it right here to the United States, right? So it's the same story again and again and again. The only difference is that previous generations of immigrants had no rights, right? There was no minimum wage, there was no OSHA, there was no National Labor Relations Act. They were easily exploited and used. If they had any of those rights, I guarantee you they would have said that they were undocumented as well. The whole construct of undocumented workers is just created to exploit people and to create a permanent underclass of working people. And that's got to stop, and that's got to change. And the good news is, in a 100-year reversal, our labor movement is on the side of undocumented immigrant workers. And that's the unfortunate thing is a lot of rank and file union members don't know this. But I think they need to know because it's the right and smart position for the labor movement to take.
The pitting of foreign students mainly who come with visas and then stay after their visa's been expired, has expired. And there's a tendency to pit those people against the immigrants coming in that are either undocumented or seeking asylum, and sort of blaming the students who overstay their visa for the problem. While they may constitute a problem, it seems to me that they shouldn't be the ones that take the rap for overpopulation of immigrants or whatever the rap may be. But I need to be a little more enlightened about that. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that obviously a major portion of the undocumented in the country are people who overstay visas. So it's not the case that every undocumented person, crossed the border without authorization. My bigger concern around that, though, is that what we're living with right now is that we're criminalizing the people who did cross the border without authorization. This is to be undocumented is not a crime. It doesn't violate any criminal statute. But if you enter the country without an inspection, in other words, if you come without authorization and you cross a border, that's a crime. If you come back after being deported, that's an even more serious federal crime. This is the fight that we had when we had our deportation defense for our brother Martin Esquivel. Martin was treated as if he was some kind of serial killer or something because he had been deported repeatedly. But he was deported repeatedly during the same 3-month period he was trying to reunite with his family. Do you see what I'm saying? Every attempt he made to cross that border, they counted that as a crime. And it's like, what father wouldn't continue to try to cross that border if his wife and children are waiting for him on the other side of that border? When did we make that a crime? Well, we have made it a crime now. And now, I have the figures here. It's crazy. It's like, the fastest growing prison population in federal detention are immigrants now. And most of those people are there for immigration-related crime. You know what that means? that means they crossed the border without authorization. And so, on the one hand, my heart goes out to all undocumented people, but I can't help but remark on this very fact. Many of the people who come here, most of the undocumented, came here with authorization. And they're not criminalized because they had the wherewithal to be able to get a student visa, right? To be able to gain entry to the country with authorization. But we stigmatize poor working people because, of course, there's no way in the world, there's no visa for you to get. If you're poor and living hand to mouth in Mexico and Central America, you have no opportunity to come to the United States. Your odds of legally coming here are next to nil. And so, what would our own? I mean, think about the Irish fleeing the famine. Do you really think they would have just stood around waiting for permission? Would they have just starved to death waiting for their papers to come through? I don't think that they would. My own family immigrated from Cuba. I have no question in my mind that with or without papers, they were going to leave. They were going to leave Cuba, and you weren't going to be able to stop them one way or another. Desperate people do desperate things.